Hi, this is Jaya. In this video, we shall see the summary of King Lear by William Shakespeare. Before going into the play, we shall see from where all Shakespeare had borrowed the idea. King Lear was a British king who reigned even before the birth of Christ. That is why Shakespeare has placed this play in a pagan setting, because at that time there was no Christianity. And Geoffrey of Monmouth also has recorded a story of King Lear and his daughters in his Historia Regum Britannia of 1137. And the main version of Shakespeare's borrowing plays are the true chronicle history of King Lear and his three daughters, and he has also borrowed from Raphael's Holinshed's Chronicle of England, Scotland and Ireland. He also, that is Raphael Holinshed, also had adapted the story from Monmouth only. And Edmund Spencer's The Fairy Queen, Sir Philip Sidney's The Countess of Pembroke's Arcadia are borrowed for the subplots, and also from John Higgins, A Mirror for Magistrates. And many of the critics say that this play must have been written after Othello and before Macbeth, and therefore they say it should be written somewhere between 1604 to 1605. And Shakespeare has also borrowed from a contemporary true story of a gentleman prisoner of Queen Elizabeth named Sir Brian Annesley, because his daughters tried to get him declared insane in late in 1603 so that they can legally take control of his estate. But that man's youngest daughter named Caudle, she came on his behalf and said that he is not mad, and she was supporting her father. And the play was first performed for the king in December 1605, and it was published in the quarto in 1608, and the title was M. William Shakespeare, His History of King Lear. And a completely revised version was again reprinted in 1623 first folio edition, and that time the title was The Tragedy of King Lear. And the main character list is King Lear, who was the king of Britain, and King of France, who is Cordelia's husband, Duke of Burgundy, who comes as a suitor for Cordelia, and Duke of Cornwall, who is Regan's husband, and Duke of Albany, who is Gunhilla's husband. Here Cordelia, Regan and Gunhild are Lear's daughters. And then we have Earl of Kent, who is a loyal person to King Lear, and later on he comes as Caius and works as a servant to King Lear. And we have Earl of Gloucester, who is actually a parallel character to Lear in the subplot, and Edgar, who is the son of Gloucester, and Edgar also comes under the name of Poor Tom of Bedlam, a demonic madman. And therefore both Kent and Edgar, they have two characters, one in disguise. And then we have Edmund, who is the bastard son to Gloucester, and we have an old man who is a tenant to Gloucester, and he is also a faithful servant to Gloucester. And Cordelia's doctor, Lear's fool, and Oswald, who is a steward to Goneril, and a captain who is under Edmund's command. And we have a gentleman who is loyal to Lear, and of course the three main characters, Goneril, Regan and Cordelia. Goneril is the first daughter, Regan is the second daughter, and Cordelia is the third and the most favored daughter of King Lear. And the play begins with Earls of Kent and Gloucester talking to each other, and from that talk we come to understand that King Lear has divided the kingdom into three parts, and in that one part is the largest part, and he wants to give it to Cordelia because she is his most favorite daughter. And before giving the land, he calls both his eldest daughters and tells them to express their love for him before receiving the land which he has allotted for them. And Goneril, she comes and she speaks about the love which she has for her father in a very eloquent manner. And then Regan comes and she says that all her love is only for her father and for no one else. Then third, Cordelia is asked to come and express her love for him. And Cordelia comes and says that she loves her father because it is a duty as a daughter, and she loves him only to that much and no more. And she wants to save some of her love for her soon to be husband. And when Lear hears this, he is really angry because he expected more from her, and therefore he strips of Cordelia's inheritance and also her title. At that time, Kent, who is there, he comes and supports Cordelia, so Lear gets angry and banishes him from the kingdom. Now here the Duke of Burgundy is there, who had come there to propose to Cordelia, But now he says he cannot accept her without the promised entitlements. But the King of France finds her more enduring because of a sincere proclamation, and therefore he makes her his wife and the Queen of France. Now Goneril and Regan, understanding that Cordelia's share is for them, they also plot to take off Lear's power out of his hands quickly. Here Edmund, who is Gloucester's bastard son, he promises to steal the land and the legitimacy of his half-brother Edgar, and therefore he manipulates in such a way that father and brother go against each other. He carries a letter, and in front of his father he tries to hide the letter which he is carrying, and therefore Gloucester forces him to show that letter. This is actually a fabricated letter from Edgar asking for Edmund to help him to overturn their father. Seeing this, Gloucester gets angry, and Edmund tries to calm him down, and he says don't come to any conclusions, and he says that he'll arrange a meeting between Gloucester and Edgar. And then Edmund goes and finds Edgar and tells him that Gloucester is angry with him, and he asks him to run away and also to be prepared with arms because anytime he'll be attacked. And here what happens is Lear decides to go and stay with Goneril, and he comes there with 100 of his trains. Trains means men who help him. And here what happens is Goneril, she wants to drive him out of her residence, and she wants him to go to Regan's place. And therefore she pretends that his knights and servants are creating a lot of havoc in her place, and she also orders her servants to treat Lear very badly. And at that time Ken comes there dressed as disguised as Cassius, and becomes Lear's servant. And Lear notices the changes in Goneril's character and the coldness which she shows towards him and her strain, and he gets very angry and he curses Goneril and even her unborn children, and he leaves to Regan's house. Albany, who is Goneril's husband, he comes and he asks her why she is treating Lear so badly, and Goneril does not listen to him, and she sends her servant Oswald to warn her sister Regan. And in Act 2 we find that Edmund comes to know about a courier that there are conflicts between Albany and Cornwall. That is, Albany is the husband of Goneril and Cornwall is the husband of Regan, and he thinks that he can use the same idea when he meets Edgar, and he informs him that there is some danger for him, and so he has to be careful, and he should always have his sword with him. And at that time he comes to know that Gloucester is coming there to meet Edgar, and somehow he manages to make Edgar be ready with a sword, and he runs away. And not only that, he also wounds himself and goes to Gloucester and tells him that Edgar only came to kill Gloucester, and when he tried to defend and stop him, he wounded him. And seeing all this, Gloucester gets very angry, and he sends his men to capture Edgar, and also tells Edmund that he can take all the land which was not for him earlier and which also belongs to Edgar. Now here what happens is Regan and Cornwall, who had come to Gloucester's castle because they had come to know about Lear's arrival, and they did not want to meet him, and they wanted King Lear to think that they had gone out somewhere so that he will leave that place. They come here and they hear about Edgar's betrayal, and now they start trusting Edmund. At the same time, Oswald and Kent, they meet at Gloucester's castle, and both have come to deliver messages, and Kent insults Oswald for his treatment towards Lear and strikes him. Hearing this noise, Cornwall, Regan, Gloucester and Edmund come there, and Cornwall and Regan, they order Kent to be put in the stocks as punishment. At that time, Lear comes there, and he couldn't believe that his own daughter and son-in-law were responsible for all the that is, he was not welcome properly, and there were no people around him, and he was really shocked. And his fool who was with him, he ridicules King Lear for his choices, like chastising Cordelia, trusting his other daughters, and above all giving up his authority as the king. And now Lear sends Gloucester for Regan and Cornwall, but they refuse to come and see Lear. Then King Lear threatens to go himself and meet them, but they immediately come there, and they pretend as though they are very happy to see him, and they were not given the information that he had come. And hearing this, Lear immediately believes Regan, and he posts to her about Goneril's treatment and expects her to show sympathy towards him. But Regan says that he has indeed done certain misdeeds by cursing Goneril, and tells him to go back to Gondor and apologize for what he had said. At the same time, Goneril, she arrives there, and she asks who put Kent in the stocks, and Cornwall says that he only did it. Now what happens is Goneril and Regan, they unite together to oppose Lear, and they say that he should not have 100 knights and servants with him because he does not need all of them since he is not a king anymore. At that time, Regan says that she will allow him to have 25. And hearing that, Lear says Gondrel had said that he can have 50. That shows that Gondrel loves him more, and so he is willing to stay with Gondrel. Now the two sisters begin to lower the size of the train that they'll allow with King Lear. They come to 10, then 5, and then finally they say that he could not have any people there along with him to assist him. Hearing this, Lear gets very angry, and he says that he does not want to be with any of his daughters, and goes into the forest. Gloucester pleads with them to allow Lear back because there is a storm approaching, and it is very dangerous for him, but both the daughters refuse because now they have already taken away everything from King Lear. Now in Act 3 we find Kent encountering one of Lear's train, and he sends him to Dover with his purse, and he says to show a ring to Cordelia if this person sees her, and also to tell her about Lear's condition and the treatment he has received from the other two daughters. And Lear here, he gets caught in the storm, and he also turns mad, and he keeps on talking about the betrayal and the filial ingratitude which was met out to him. And Lear admits that he has sinned because he had betrayed his daughter and had not understood the real meaning of what she had said. But at the same time, he feels that others have sinned more against him. At that time, Kent comes there, and he tries to get Lear inside a hovel for shelter, and the fool also prophesies that when men are honest and sincere, England will fall apart. And Lear sends the fool into the hovel first, but the fool comes out screaming because he meets Edgar, who is disguised as a poor beggar, poor Tom of Bedlam. And Tom comes and he babbles and illustrates his demonic madness, and Lear thinks that he must also have suffered from ungrateful daughters. And Tom tells his history as a serving man given over to lust, which brings Lear to question him about the makeup of man. And Lear himself approaches unaccommodated essential men. And Lear goes to the extent of stripping off his clothes, but the fool stops him. Now Gloucester confides in Edmund that he has received a letter with the news of a movement to avenge the king. And he tells him to be quiet, and Gloucester goes to find Lear because he does not want to follow the orders of Regan and Gondrel and kill Lear, and he wants to save Lear and take him to a safe shelter. Now Lear wants to stay only with Tom, whom he calls as a philosopher. So Kent asks Tom also to accompany Lear to go to the shelter, and they go there. And now the fool, Lear and Tom, they keep talking about the definition of a madman. And Lear decides to hold a mock trial for Regan and Gondrel, and to tell about all the offences which they have done to him. And he places Fool and Tom as the judges. And we find that Lear has lost all his wits. At that time, Gloucester returns with the news of Regan and Gondrel's plot against Lear's life. And he says that he has secured transportation for him and sends him off to Dover. And Edgar also remains with him. Now Edmund, he eagerly uses Gloucester's confidence, and he collects all the information from him, and he goes and tells this to Cornwall. And he also pretends that he is very sad because he is betraying his father. But Cornwall makes him the new Earl of Gloucester, and also calls for a search for Gloucester. And he then sends Gondrel and Edmund to Albany so that Edmund will not be present for his father's punishment, therefore he need not feel bad. And Regan and Gondrel here, they call for Gloucester to be hanged or blinded because he did not follow their instructions. And Gloucester is brought to Regan and Cornwall, who tie them up. Now since they are only his guests, he is shocked by their rudeness to him. And once they tell him that they have got his letter, he admits that he only sent Lear to Dover because he knows that his daughters have treated him horribly cruel. Now Cornwall blinds one of Gloucester's eyes. Seeing this, one of the servants, he comes and he wounds Cornwall badly, and Regan slays him. Cornwall then blinds the other eye also of Gloucester, and Regan notifies that to Gloucester that Edmund was the one who informed him against him. Now Gloucester realizes that he has wronged Edgar and he has been betrayed by Edmund, and he is also turned out into the storm, and a few loyal servants come along with him. Now in Act 4, Gloucester is led by an old man, though Gloucester wants to be alone, and now he prays that he wants to see his son Edgar again. At that time they come across poor Tom, and who is actually Edgar in disguise, and Gloucester chooses to allow Tom to take him, and he keeps talking with him, and he says that they have come, the time has come where madman will be led by blind people. And he says that blind people are led only by the madmen nowadays. And Gloucester also asks him to take him to a high cliff in Dover so that he can jump from there and commit suicide. Then he gives Tom his purse and tells him that this is one effort on his side to balance the economic inequality of the world. And when they come to Dover, Edgar somehow tricks his father into thinking that they have climbed a steep hill, and then he says that he can fall from the cliff. But when Gloucester falls, he falls flat. And before he falls, actually he blesses Edgar. Then Edgar runs back to him and he pretends as though he is another stranger and talks to him and says that it is a miracle that he fell from such a height and he did not die. And he says must be a spirit only would have left him in the summit, and that is why he is safe. And now what happens is Gloucester believes that the poor Tom was a spirit who had saved his life, but is depressed that he was not even allowed to die when he wants. At the same time here, Gondal and Edmund are greeted by Oswald, who tells him that Albany has changed his attitude, and he feels sorry for whatever has happened to Lear. And he says that he is pleased by the invention of France, and he is displeased by Edmund. Now Gondal sends Edmund back to Cornwall with a promise to unite as mates and rulers, because she says that because Gondal wants to marry Edmund. And at the same time she finds her husband angry against her for the treatment he has heard she and Rogan bore against Lear. And she also comes to know that he has said that he will tear her apart if she were not a woman. And that he has learnt that Gloucester has been blinded, and then Cornwall died from a wound caused by the servant defending him. Now Gondal feels torn about Cornwall's death, and Albany learns that Edmund informed against Gloucester, and he also promises to avenge Gloucester's blindness. Here Regan is then greeted by Oswald, and she says that they should have killed Gloucester in this situation, because Gloucester is arousing a lot of sympathy for him around there. And Edmund, who is supposed to be looking for him also, is worried. And she is also worried that Edmund and her sister are planning to become intimate, and she wants Oswald to remind Edmund of the promises he had made her that he will marry her. Now both the sisters want to marry Edmund, that is very clear. Now Kent meets a gentleman he sent ahead to Dover and learns that the King of France has had to return, though Cordelia and others remain. And he asks how Cordelia received the message about Lear, and the person says that she received the information about Lear with smiles and tears, and Lear is ashamed to face her, but she has sent a doctor who has assured that he will somehow put Lear to rest, and that will really help Lear. And Lear stumbles upon Gloucester and Edgar, and he rambles about the manipulation of his daughters and the evil nature of women. And he recognizes Gloucester's voice and mentions he is ignorant about how he was ignorant about Edmund's betrayal, and how his adulterous ways has been more fortunate for him than Lear's legitimate ones. And Lear tells him that blindness should in fact help Gloucester to see the pretense in the largest flaw of most in authority. And Gordelia's gentlemen find Lear and somehow try to bring him back, but he thinks that they have come to capture him, so he runs away from there. And Oswald somehow tracks Gloucester down and hopes to kill him, but Edgar comes there and they fight, and Oswald falls. And he tells Edgar to give the letter he was carrying to Edmund. And Edgar is angry when he sees that the letter is from Gondrel, and there are references where she says that she wishes to kill Albany and marry Edmund. And Lear has been found, and he is given sleeping drugs by Cordelia's doctor. And Cordelia thanks Kent for all the support and goodwill he has given to the king. And she bemoans the horrible treatment her sisters have shown Lear. And now Lear is brought, but he does not recognize any of them, because now he is become he's going mad. and finally understands that he is with Cordelia, but still he is confused. And in the final act, Regan questions Edmund as to his relationship with Gondrel, and Edmund promises that he is not intimately involved with her. Now Gondrel notices that all this, and she prefers rather to lose France than to her sister for Edmund's hand. And here Gondrel and Albany discuss the importance of being united with Regan to face France, because only if both of them are united they can defeat France. And Edgar, who is still in disguise, finds Albany and passes on the letter from Goneril. And Edgar tells him to be careful because he has to save himself. And Edmund, in a soliloquy, tells on the question, he questions on which sister to choose. And finally he decides to take Gondrel if she manages to kill Albany. And he is doing this because he wants to rule a reunited Britain. Now the battle begins. Cordelia and Lear are leading one army, and Edgar also leaves Gloucester in a very safe place, and he comes and fights for them. And Edgar returns after some time with the news that Lear and Cordelia have been taken as prisoners, and Edmund makes them to go to the prison. And Edmund hands a death note to a captain, and Albany praises Edmund for his act of battle but reminds him he is a subordinate, so he cannot be the equal. That time Edmund lies, saying that Cordelia and Lear are merely being retained. At this time Regan declares that now since Edmund is the new partner, he is also an equal, and this makes Gondrel jealous. And Albany responds with a claim of treason and challenges Edmund to a duel. And that time Regan is escorted out, and they hear a trumpet 3 times, and disguised Edgar appears to fight Edmund. Edmund falls, but Albany spares him until he can incriminate him. Albany quiets Gondrel with a letter, though she maintains she is above any law, and she is the ruler of it, so no one can punish her for what she has done. And she runs away in anger, and Edmund admits his guilt, and Edgar reveals himself. And in response to Albany's questioning, Edgar explains how he has been disguised as a beggar, and that he has led and cared for Gloucester until his death. And he says that Gloucester died overwhelmed by happiness and sadness shortly after Edgar revealed that he is his son. And Edgar was then met by Kent, who also told of his disguise and Lear's state, and how he was also coming close to his death. And a gentleman at that time brings a knife with which Gondrella had killed herself before she had actually poisoned Regan. So both of them are dead now, and their bodies are called for. And Kent comes there hoping to say goodbye to Lear, and this reminds Albany to ask about Lear and Cordelia's condition. At that time Edmund informs them that he and Gondrel had ordered Cordelia to be hanged so that it will look like suicide, and Lear entered with Cordelia's body, and he had also killed the man who had hanged her. And Ken tries to say goodbye to him, but Lear does not recognize him, and he does not even understand that he is the one who came and helped him as his servant Caius. And then they are informed about Edmund's death, and Albany gives Lear back the absolute rule, and Kent and Edgar they rise. And Lear swoons for Cordelia's death, and he also dies soon. And then Albany gives Kent and Edgar the shared rule, but Kent notices that he will die soon, and thus Edgar becomes the next king, and the play ends here. It's one of the most famous plays of Shakespeare. If you want to add anything to what I have said, anything more to what I have said, please write it in the comment box. It will be useful to others. Like the video, share it with your friends, and if you have not subscribed my channel, please subscribe. Thank you.